Here we are in part 3 of chapter 6, Styles of Effective Listening. Really, maybe the better way to define this part of the chapter is to say that there are different purposes behind listening. We do listening for different reasons and in different ways. So that's really what this first one is talking about. Listening is situational. Context is everything whenever it comes to communication. We communicate differently depending on who we are talking to, where the conversation is taking place, for what purpose the conversation is taking place, and maybe some other things as well. So we adjust our listening style based on purpose. If we know that this information that's being shared is very important, maybe it's instructions for a job that we're doing, or an assignment in a class, then we're going to listen on a different level than if we are just trying to pass the time with a coworker. Depending on how much we know about a subject or about a person, we'll listen to different levels. And so there's a whole lot of different things that factor into this. Listening is situational. Another style of listening is empathetic listening. Empathy, to put it simply, is trying to see things as others see them and feel them as other people feel them. So when we listen to someone with the idea of being empathetic, we try to see the world from the speaker's point of view. It's no longer being objective, this is being subjective, but from another person's point of view. Where it says to engage in equal two-way conversation, this doesn't necessarily mean that the amount of speaking is equal. Here we're talking about reducing power distance or physical barriers. So if you were to come to talk to me about something, and I wanted to be empathetic and try to engage in equal two-way conversation, I would not sit in a place where there was a desk between me and you, because that places distance and it's intimidating. However, in the classroom that I teach in, there's a lot of power distance because I have a stage in that classroom. And so when I talk to students who are standing off of the stage, they're quite a bit lower than me. And so if I have a student approach me, say after class, I have a stool that's up on my stage. And if I want to downplay the power distance, I will sit on that stool, and it usually puts me somewhere close to eye level with those students. Just trying to downplay the power distance to make things more comfortable, to allow for that two-way conversation. With empathetic listening, you are trying to understand both the thoughts and the feelings associated with a message. Now, there is one caution in the textbook here. They say don't overdo it. Stay in control of your emotions. Don't let that empathy get the best of you. Then we have what's called polite listening. We all like to be polite, and we like people to be polite to us. So with polite listening, you want to avoid interrupting the speaker. Wait till it's your turn if you have something to say. You want to give supportive listening cues, whether that be nodding when appropriate, or it's responding whenever you're asked a question, or it's saying things like, yes, go on, as we discussed earlier in a different lecture. And then that word empathy shows up again here, that we want to show empathy with the speaker, that we understand their emotional state, we understand frustration, or whatever is appropriate there. We want to maintain eye contact. One tricky thing about listening is that there's a higher, at least in American culture, there's a higher expectation for eye contact when we're listening than when we're speaking. Oftentimes when we're speaking, we have to look away to think clearly. So it's acceptable to look away briefly from your listener when you're thinking. But as a listener, you need to be making solid eye contact, only occasionally looking away. And then giving positive feedback is another way to be polite. It doesn't mean you can't disagree, but if you do disagree, do so positively, addressing issues and not attacking personalities. The next type of listening is called critical listening. Critical listening is an important skill. We don't like the idea of criticism or being critical of other people. Actually, that's probably not true. We like being critical of other people, but we don't like people being critical of us. But we all need to develop critical listening and critical thinking skills. Part of being critical is keeping an open mind. It's listening to the entire message before making judgment calls. We need to avoid filtering or oversimplifying complex messages. If it goes over our head, we need to ask questions. And we need to recognize those biases that we've already talked about earlier in the chapter. We need to work against the tendency that we have to do what's called sharpening, or honing in on specific parts of a message while ignoring others. When we do that, when we sharpen certain words or concepts within a message, oftentimes it makes it difficult for us to see the big picture. We need to watch nonverbal messages as much as we listen to verbal messages. We need to see both sides of the communication. And then watch out for language fallacies and logical fallacies. And you can see some examples of those language fallacies within the textbook. And we have just what's called active listening. This is the last one. A couple of slides to focus on that. For active listening, we want to understand the content and understand the emotion of what's going on. For this type of listening, we're listening to understand. We're trying to acknowledge feelings and emotions, and it's oftentimes healthy to encourage the speaker to explore their thoughts and feelings through their speaking process. So whether that's by asking specific questions in response, genuine questions where we are just trying to get deeper information, or it's other prods that say things like "go on," keep explaining that, or can you go more into this? A variety of different things that we might do to encourage someone to keep talking. Kind of already touched on a few techniques here, but additional techniques for active listening. To make sure that you understand what's being said, oftentimes you want to paraphrase what you think they mean. When we paraphrase information, that's a really good gauge of if we understand something. If you can put it into your own words and it still means the same thing as what the speaker intended, it means you understand it. Don't just try to understand a speaker's emotion, acknowledge it. Express your understanding of their feelings. Try to put a name to their feelings. And then, of course, we keep talking about asking questions for deeper understanding. These are all different things that we can do to help us in the active listening process.